I was listening fairly carefully, and I'm happy to report that I didn't hear anybody say that their candidate would defend and speak in favor of American exceptionalism or defend America as the essential nation. However, I still think, especially in regard to climate, there are three commonly used expressions that really infuriate me, and I'm looking for the candidate who might have the courage to actually address these issues. The first one is this. In 1992, at the first Rio Conference on the Environment, Bush the first was asked something about what was America willing to do to deal with the climate change problems. This is 1992, this is almost 30 years ago. And he said, well, the standard of living of the American people is not up to negotiation, open to negotiation. In other words, we may have to do something about climate change, but we're not going to reduce our standard of living. We're not going to reduce our demands on the environment. The second thing that drives me a little bit crazy is when, in talking about dealing with climate change, people make an expression like this, you know, well, America has to show some leadership, you know, we have to show that we're leaders in, when in fact, if we look candidly at the world, it's too late. Other countries have taken the leadership. Other people have been making the solar panels and building the windmills and these kinds of things for many, many years. And we're not going to be the leaders. We're going to have to be followers. We're going to find out how these people did these things and try to do them ourselves. And the last expression that annoys me a lot is this one, you know, the American dream. And the American dream is that every generation is going to have a better standard of living than the generation before. Well, this seems to be like an unjust and impossible desire. At the time I first started reading about these figures, it was something like this. Americans are 5% of the world population, and they consume 25% of the energy and 25% of the resources in the world. The last thing I read, the population had gone down to only 4%, and we were consuming 30%. So I think we have to face the fact that the American dream is the rest of the world's nightmare. If the United States is fewer people is going to have more and more, then what does that imply for the rest of the people in the world? They're going to have less and less. So I'm looking for the candidate that I think might have the courage to say to the American people, you're not so exceptional. You know, I'd like the candidate who might talk a little bit about American humility and American remorse for some of the things that it has done and the positions that it has taken. Did any of you have any evidence that your candidate might have the courage to make that kind of statement to the American people and specifying what's really involved in overcoming the climate crisis? Now, I'm not saying that poor people should have less. When I talk about, you know, the 4% and the 30%, what we really need is a way of lifting up the bottom people and saying to the people who have 3 private jets, and the guy who was a Romney, whose wife has an elevator in the garage so that she can bring up and down from the 15 cars that they own, yes, that there will be losses, and that we can't solve the climate problem without some degree of saying no to ourselves.
Good question. All right, so I'd like to, since it's addressed to all the candidates, I'd like to give Melissa Mayer the first shot at answering that.
Thank you for your very passionate question. So, you know, Marianne travels around this country campaigning, you know, as do all the candidates, and you know, she talks about, you know, Americans saying, we're good people, we're no better, she's not saying we're any better or worse than other people, you know, around the world, but we're good people. But sometimes we have been slow to wake up in the past, in many areas. But then when Americans do wake up, she says we slam it like nobody's business. So I think in terms of climate, we have been slow to wake up and stand up on this issue. And in terms of, you know, Marianne talks about a nation is a group of people. So the same principles that apply to changing a person apply to changing a nation. And what does it take to change a person? A fearless moral inventory. And they talk about that in Alcoholics Anonymous and in kind of other like spiritual transformation kind of platforms about looking at yourself and looking at your behavior. So I think Marianne is very passionate about looking at individual behavior. And in terms of, the wealth inequality, Marianne's been talking about, trickle-down economics, for decades now, and talking about how, if the corporations just, if all they have to do is report to their gains, it'll create wealth that will trickle down, and that, the jury is in, and that it's created this large wealth inequality, and that's why Marianne does talk about, repealing and changing, tax guidelines on the wealthiest Americans, and a lot of those wealthy Americans agree. So in terms of that, that's how Marianne feels, and I think Marianne would absolutely be willing to stand up to a lot of the things that you're saying and take ownership of and own and name a lot of the problems, including the climate crisis.
Thank you. Lauren Nidell?
Yeah, Bernie definitely believes in accountability. He just recently he came out and basically was asked, well, if rich neighborhoods where people live near the shore, if their houses get destroyed due to climate change and rising seawater, should they be rebuilt? He said no. And if you want to be accountable, or they should not get insurance for that. If you want to build in these areas where there's no sustainability, you will not be subsidized by the federal government. And I think that's part of what you were saying, is who will actually say no, who won't give money, keep on giving money to those entitled just because they're entitled. That was one specific situation. He also wants to make the fossil fuel industry pay for their pollution. That money has to come back. He does not want people that, poison the waters, such as the Exxon Valdez or the crisis in Louisiana, where they pollute and poison the waters, and then it's all a tax credit back to them. He will end the tax subsidies and the tax credits for pollution caused by these fossil fuel industries. He'll prosecute and sue the fossil fuel industries for the damage it has caused, and he'll create a national climate risk report so that people will know when they are in areas that are subject to extreme climate change, which could be almost anybody on the coast, that there'll be a risk factor associated with where they live. So it's not just build where you want to build and destroy, and kind of invade the preservation lands just for the sake of having your house on the shore. He'll be accountable, and he'll make sure people are accountable for those actions, and they won't be rewarded.
Okay, thank you. And Ryan Healy, do you want to address that question?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to thank you for your question. This is my opinion only. I agree with you. The phrase American exceptionalism really bothers me too. So we're in agreement there. Again, that's my opinion. Now, in terms of your question, I would actually consider looking at it a little bit differently. I'm really encouraged about what I've seen, especially with the younger generation. People marching in the streets, mobilizing. You have climate leaders like Greta Thunberg, who her entire life is dedicated to sustainability. And she's inspired an entire movement of millions of people around the world. You look at just how much climate change has grown in public awareness just in the last couple of years. It's incredible. It's remarkable. You have young leaders in Congress like Representative Cortez, whose her advocacy on climate change, as she's done more on climate than some of the Democratic politicians have done. She's done more in 9 or 10 months. Some of the Democratic politicians have done in 4 decades. And it's really the younger generation. That's where the energy is, and that's where I'm inspired. I think that this is going to be a groundbreaking election. I think we're going to see youth turnout like we've never seen before. And I think that the younger generation really understands that, we do have to be socially conscious. We do have to, do what we can, whether that's taking public transportation or, choosing higher MPG vehicles. There are a variety of different things. Obviously, our government needs to take it seriously as well. Right now, we give almost $30 billion a year to the fossil fuel industry. We need to seriously reconsider our public policy. But in terms of your larger question, I actually am inspired with the younger generation, and I do think we are seeing some positive developments.
Thank you, Brian. And Lauren Pothier, please.
I think this is a question of just stepping back from what we are attempting to lead in. Like, we are attempting to lead in military, and we're attempting to lead in business and in trade, and in doing so, we are just spending exuberant amounts of money and wasting so much time and effort, and we are forgetting about these programs like climate change and solar power and green manufacturing, where we could, while we are spending trillions of dollars in military, we could be investing, and there's no reason why we couldn't be a leader in climate change. So like you said, there are already people, it's too late, we are already behind. There are already people leading in climate change. So I think it's time that we step towards becoming one of the leaders, or following with the leaders towards a healthier and unified world. And I really loved what you said about the American dream, because I did a lot of studying on the American dream in college, and it's been dead for a long time for the middle class because of wealth inequality and redlining districts, and just a plethora of reasons. We need to just hold accountable the false dreams we put on our citizens, and we say, oh, it's going to be okay, but then we put all of our time and effort elsewhere. And I think someone like Elizabeth Warren completely understands that, as someone who grew up in a very rural Oklahoma, and a very middle class family, very similar to my family dynamic. So I really liked your question, and it's got me thinking. I just started typing up a lot, but I don't know if that answers, but
Okay, well, thank you.
yeah.